16. For many are called, but few are chosen. So last Sunday, we heard the story about Moses climbing up the mountain and God delivering those 10 commandments or laws for the Hebrew people to live by. And we know they were given to the people by a loving and caring God who wanted people to live together as a community of faith. That all sounds great, doesn't it? So now we just heard the latest installment of the story of the Hebrews and just how much they paid attention to those 10 commandments, at least as far as the one about idol worship is concerned. Now, to be fair, Moses, for whatever reason, decided to climb back up that mountain one more time. This time, he's up there talking with God for 40 days. That's a long time by anyone's standards. After the Hebrews, it felt as though they had been abandoned by Moses and God. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that the folks became disillusioned by it all. Once again, people started moaning, groaning, and complaining. And I think that we can all understand everyone's frustration and anger. So they turned to Moses' brother Aaron, who was only too happy to take over. And that's how we ended up with the familiar story of the golden calf. You can almost see everyone singing and dancing and having a grand time with that calf. Think Cecil B. DeMille and a cast of thousands along with Charlton Heston. You get the picture? Remember that story? Anyway, we got the point about this idol worship, and we were reminded about idols that we tend to worship every day. We get that part. We continue to worship material wealth too much food, too much comfort, too many toys and gadgets. But there's more to this part of the story than just the golden calf. There's that conversation between Moses and God for us to think about. Moses and God are discussing those crazy, complaining, moaning, groaning Israelites who have evidently changed their minds about the laws that they've been given and are down there at the bottom of the mountain, rousing and carousing around the golden calf. Anyway, Moses has at last come to the end of his rope. He's ready to call it quits once and for all. You've got to do something about these rabble-rousers, God. They're driving me nuts. And so God says, no problem. I'll just send down a little lightning and fire and get rid of all of them. And then in almost a blink of an eye, Moses says, now hold on, God. I know these people are a pain in the neck, and that I'm sick and tired of trying to corral them into one community of faith, but let's not get too hasty here. Think about it. Maybe we shouldn't do away with them. Maybe we can figure out something else. And so, as the story goes, God's mind was changed, and rather than fire and brimstone, God sent love, peace, grace, and mercy. I wonder, did God's mind change? Was God truly turned around? Or did God convince Moses to change his mind about the people? And faced with death and destruction, perhaps it was really Moses who had a changed heart that day. Maybe this conversation between Moses and God was God's way of helping the people of Israel and us to change our minds about who is really in charge. Now, there are a number of things that I think Jesus really loved to do And I believe one of his favorite things was telling a story. And if you were in Bible study this week, you know that, right? He was a great teller of tall tales. In other words, Jesus was fond of parables. By now, I imagine you realize that the parables Jesus often told were stories filled with impossible situations and amazing hyperbole. The stories Jesus told were really out of this world. Jesus not only loved to tell outlandish stories, he also enjoyed a good party. Remember the wedding at Cana and the Passover meals he loved. We've heard that he enjoyed getting together with his friends and disciples in Capernaum, and we know how often he sat down to dinner with all sorts of people. So it shouldn't surprise us that Jesus told this story about a great wedding feast when he was confronted by some good church one day. Just so you can get your bearings, Jesus is still hanging out in the temple, trying to talk some sense into those good, upstanding temple leaders who just weren't convinced that Jesus should be telling them anything. Now, I realize you just heard the story, but I'm going to tell it again, just in case you missed all of it the first time around. So, once upon a time, a king's son was getting married. The invitations had been sent out to all the right people, the higher-ups, the wealthy, the solid community citizens, people like the temple leaders. The king had planned the party beyond anyone's imagination. He had chosen the best caterer who had been working day and night to prepare the most delectable and expensive dishes. And this was a 5-star event. The orchestra was world famous. There was to be dancing and singing and wonderful entertainment. The king was planning to have a wedding that was bigger and better than anything Married at First Sight or Hollywood could have ever dreamed of. So, just think how our king felt when all of the people he had invited refused to show up. Well, first of all, I think that was rather dumb, because we all know that if a king invites you to a party, the smart and healthy thing to do is to show up without any excuses. But these good folks just refused. They found a million reasons not to go. Not willing to give up, the king sent some messengers out to his kingdom to round up other people. This time he told all of the good folks that everything was ready. The food was hot and hearty, the wine and beer were chilled, the band was all warmed up. Come to the party, the messengers shouted. But the good church folks, good community folks refused again. And on top of it all, they killed the messengers. How crazy is that? By this time, our king is furious. And as Jesus told the story, the king was so riled up that he did away with all of those good folks and burned their city. Now, I'm sure by now you're beginning to realize that Jesus' stories can get out of hand. Think about it. How could all this stuff be going on while the food for the wedding banquet was still being kept warm, and the beer and wine were still being chilled, and the band just kept playing right along? That's crazy, isn't it? Now I'm going to stop for a moment and tell you another story that might make more sense. It seems there was a congregation whose church bulletin contained this announcement. To make it more possible for everyone to attend worship next Sunday, we're going to have a special no excuse Sunday. Cots will be placed in the foyer for those who say, Sunday is my only day to sleep in. We'll have steel helmets for those who say the roof will cave in if I ever come to church. Blankets will be furnished for those who think the church is too cold, and fans for those who say it's too hot. We'll have hearing aids for those who say the preacher speaks too softly, and cotton balls for those who say she preaches too loudly. Scorecards will be available for those who wish to list the hypocrites present. Some relatives will be in attendance for those who like to go visiting on Sundays. There will be microwave dinners for those who can't go to church and cook dinner too. One section will be devoted to trees and grass for those who like to see God in nature. Finally, the sanctuary will be decorated with both Christmas poinsettias and Easter lilies for those who have never seen the church without them. You see, we could all come up with excuses for not coming to the party. Anyway, back to the parable. By now the king is exasperated. He's run out of ideas and his son is really getting worried. Not to mention all the food is finally getting to spoil and the orchestra is just about worn out. So, our king comes up with a brilliant plan. He grabs some more servants and tells them, go out to the market and the streets and bring back anyone who is willing to come. It doesn't matter who they are or whether they're rich or poor or good or bad. Just get folks to enjoy the party with us. We'll have more than enough for everybody. We'll even furnish the clothes for people to wear. And so, sure enough, pretty soon the place is packed with a ragtag bunch of folks from all over town. Some people are smart enough to know a good thing when they see it. Anyway, they did indeed party. The king, they sang and danced and drank, and the king was thrilled. Everybody was having the time of their lives. The party was really going well. They were rocking the rafters. Except, and in Jesus' absurd stories, there always seems to be an except of some sort. And the except in this story is a young man who came but didn't bother putting on the clothes that were offered to him. Not only that, he was just standing around on the sidelines, not participating, just watching. He was there all right, but he really wasn't part of the fun. Eventually, the king noticed him and became extremely angry. The king refused to listen to any excuses this guy might have had. It was clear to our king that this bystander wasn't ready to come to the party. He had the wrong attitude about the whole thing. His body was there, but his spirit was out in the street somewhere. So that's exactly what the king said. Out of here, you fool, the king said. If you're not going to be part of the joy and celebration, then go home. In other words, the king said, what you need is an attitude adjustment. Now, maybe we're getting the point of this little absurd story by now. We know that God is the king and the party is the table of grace that we've all been invited to. We've all been invited to come to the party that is the Church of Jesus Christ. All of God's people are welcome, the rich and poor, the good and bad. All that's required is that we get ourselves ready by putting on the right attitude, getting ourselves in the right frame of mind. Now, this fantastic and unbelievable parable compels us to take a look at ourselves. This weird story is telling us that we need to figure out that God is calling us to actually do something so that we can enjoy the feast of life. Even though we may believe we're prepared and ready to make But even as joy-filled as his words are to the Philippians, trouble is brewing in this tiny congregation. Endurance, and they are squabbling. Now, we don't know exactly what the trouble is. It doesn't seem to be about any kind of deep theological differences. Rather, their disagreement could have been over what color the church carpet should be. Or maybe they couldn't agree about whether the choir should sing from the front of the sanctuary or the back of the sanctuary. Maybe the two women disagreed about what sort of casserole to make for the church potluck. Whatever the dispute, Paul heard about it and how personal it had become. So he reminded the congregation to find the solution, and to remember that they are a community of faith, a family whose members may disagree once in a while, but who are always filled with the joy of living with Christ in their midst. William Willimon, a Methodist bishop, told this story about serving in a local church. He once told his congregation, "As your pastor, I like to go after big game in my sermons, large sins, global problems. I keep waiting and hoping for the church to at last rise above its pettiness and go on to more grand and glorious tasks. Then it's fight over who got hurt, whose feelings hurt at the church picnic last week." But Willimon observes that this is the real church. Churches are filled with all sorts of people, just as Jesus tells us the party is open to everyone, and sometimes those who come aren't the people we would choose. We are a family united by Christ, and through the living Christ, we are all connected. And sometimes that means we don't agree, but that's the church. We come to the party just as we are, and it's up to us to participate and not just hang around the sidelines. And that's what Paul's trying to tell us when we come together as one body. We're able to celebrate a truly joy-filled life. Paul doesn't mean the bubbly, giddy, jumping up and down sort of joy. The joy Paul wants for us is the joy that comes to us, knowing that Christ is in our lives every day and every moment. The truth is that sometimes it's just about impossible for us to find joy in our daily lives. Life is full of ways for it to fall apart in so many ways. We have health concerns for ourselves and our loved ones. We're concerned about our homes, our livelihoods, our futures, and our list goes on and on. Paul was facing torture and death as he wrote these words, telling us to rejoice in our life and to move forward. Paul knew joy isn't an escape from the pain of life. Rather, it's a reconsideration and reinvestment in life, knowing that God is at work in it. Just as God pointed out to Moses, sometimes we need to change our minds about what is truly meaningful and satisfying. And we are reminded by Jesus' absurd story that from time to time, we might just need an attitude adjustment. So here's the good news. In spite of all our shortcomings and failures, we're still invited to the party to share the feast of life in Christ. All we have to do is accept God's invitation to come just as we are.